Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we're continuing to work on the Kubota engine rebuild. So here's a front view of the Kubota engine. And you might be wondering to yourself, why is the engine still in this condition? Well, that's because I just demonstrated the rule of trial and error. I put all the engine back together, and when I tried to turn the crankshaft, the motor would only do 3/4 of a revolution. What was happening is the piston was making contact with the valves, and therefore something was wrong with my reinstallation. So this video, I hope, will serve as a reference to anyone undertaking a project like this to avoid the mistakes that I've made. So maybe if you come on in, I'll show you what to look for. So timing is very important with an engine. So just please make note that the gear on the crankshaft has one dot, and this center gear, which runs on a dummy shaft, it also has a dot. The cam gear has 2 dots, and the center gear also has 2 dots. And over here on the injector pump, it has 3 dots. And there's 3 dots corresponding on the center gear. When the piston is top dead center, you need to ensure that all these dots align. And that's what I didn't do when I rebuilt the engine or put the engine together initially. Initially, when I put the crankshaft in, before we put the connecting rods and the pistons, I had lined up the bottom gear dot with the top gear, or this gear, but I had paid no attention to the placement of the cam gear and the injector gear. So whenever you're doing something like this, just make sure you pay attention to the timing. Luckily, I don't have to buy a new timing gear cover gasket. I was able to salvage that. Right now, I'm going to reinstall the timing gear cover. So let's dive right in. I have the front engine cover in place, the bottom crank pulley and the additional spline or front power takeoff adapter in place, as well as the idler pulley for the fan. The next step I'm going to do is install the head. So I have the gasket in place. I have the little blue O-ring here in the back in place. Now I'll just grab the head right here and just drop it in place. And then drop it down. I have my head bolts here and my orange hybrid Loctite. As you notice, I put in some paper towel stuffed into the openings where the injectors go, and that's just to make sure that I don't drop anything down inside the combustion chamber by accident. Just a little precaution there. The head bolts are meant to be torqued down to 32 foot-pounds. These go onto the stud. Next thing we're going to do is install the push rods. Make sure they're inside the opening. Just wiggle them to make sure they're in place. There's 4 of them. Then you're going to put on these little top covers. I think they're called tappers or tappets. And then I'll install the rockers as evenly as possible. There's a washer and a nut that goes on top of there. Washer first, and then a nut. These nuts have to be torqued down to 15 foot-pounds, and I believe they are 12. So I'll need a 12 deep, and I need to make sure that we torque that down with no pressure on the valves here. Right there, I'd say, is a safe place to torque these down. So I can move him, move him, move him. Okay, so let me get a deep 12. The other consideration we have to do is ensure the valve lash. So when the engine is up, there's no pressure on these valves, okay? That valve is opening. If I go back, he opens. I'd say I have to be right about here. We have the head bolts tightened down. We have the rocker stands torqued down. The next thing we're going to do is check the valve lash. Now, the valve lash with a cold engine has a range of 6 to 8 thou. So I'm going to go with a nominal of 7 thou. So I'm using my feeler gauge. I'm picking 7 thou. What we're doing is we're setting the clearance between the rocker arm and the valve. So in order to do that, you put a flat blade screwdriver in place. You loosen the retaining nut, and I'll back off. I'll set the 7 thou feeler gauge in place. I'll turn this in until I feel a little bit of resistance, and then I come in with my 10mm wrench and I just tighten that lock nut. Okay, I like that. I'll do the same for this one. So what I ended up doing is I rotated the engine a few times by hand so that the valves would cycle, and then I verified the valve lash a second time, make sure that we're targeting that nominal value of 7 thou, and then I went over here again with the closed end of my wrench, and I went over and I gave these nuts a real good torque down to make sure that they're tight. Now that's done, let's put the valve cover back on. I'll just put a little bit of it's new engine oil on our new O-ring. Okay, so I have a little film there, and then we'll just pop our valve cover in place. Here's the two caps. There's two copper washers, so make sure you have those in place. We'll get these on. I think that's a number 12. You see the gasket compressing? Okay, so I don't want to over tighten this, just get it snug. See how you see some of the grease popping out? So I'm going to leave that on there for now. The next step we'll do is we'll install our intake. Here's a view of the intake manifold. So there's 3 short bolts and then there's 1 long bolt here on the end. And you'll need two gaskets to seal that to the engine. Here are the brand new gaskets. Part number 15263-11830 and 15263-11820. Okay, so the intake is in place. I think what we'll do to ensure we don't have any foreign material entering the engine, let's install our glow plugs. We need to ensure that we have our electrical supply to the glow plugs, which is right here. Okay, so we'll twist him around. We'll make sure that he's on there. Just bend this electrical lead so there's not so much torque on there. And then you install your jumper wire. Then I'll install these nice little nuts. There's a groove machined into these nuts which will allow for tightening. So thread that on like that. And then do the same for this one. Then you take a really good sharp flat blade screwdriver and you come in here in that little groove that I was showing you and then just rotate clockwise just to tighten this nut, and that's how you do it. Put a little bit of pressure on it and turn. So there you have it. The electrical lead is in place. The next step we'll do is we'll install the injectors. So I'll remove my plugs. So I recommend, since we're redoing this engine or rebuilding it, I've opted to buy brand new copper crush washers for the injectors. So I bought 2. They are part number 17011-53620. So let's get those installed. So here they are. These are the copper crush washers I was telling you about. They're nice and thick. We'll drop those inside. I'll put them on my finger like a ring and then just get them in place. Here are the injectors for the Kubota. They're nice and clean. This one I'll clean up a little bit before I put it in, but you can see this one nice and clean and shiny. So I'll put him in. And I'm gonna go clean up this injector with a little bit of brake clean and a toothbrush. So I have this injector cleaned, and now we'll get it installed. Try to go in carefully, and then I'll just put that in for now, hand tight. I'm just gonna jump over to this side of the engine, and I'm gonna make my electrical connections on the dynamo. Let's get these two electrical leads connected. Make sure it goes all the way into the connector. This is going to the headlights. Okay, the next step I'll do is install the oil filter. Here's my brand new Wix oil filter, part number 51064. Put a little bit of oil on the O-ring before you put it on. And put it on. Put it on hand tight, just like that. So now I'll install the valve cover breather tube. Put a little bit of oil on here to aid in the installation. Push this down into the holder. Then we'll get this popped in place like that. Move it behind, tuck it in right there. So there you go. So down through the holder, in behind the oil filter. Next step is let's get the front of the engine installed. So we'll get the belt and the fan. Here's the fan belt. It's a nice little small little belt. I will loosen this nut off, so that we can get the belt on. Next thing we'll do is we'll install the fan. The fan uses 4 10mm bolts, and there are the equivalent of 4 washers on this. Actually, it's meant to prevent the bolts from coming loose. So I'll demonstrate that as soon as we get this in place. See, there's these tabs that you bend over the bolt just to ensure that they don't vibrate loose. So I'll snug them up with my impact here. They're 10mm bolts, right? So you don't want to over torque these and strip these. There you have it. The next thing we're going to do is install the guard that mounts right here on the engine frame. I believe it goes in this orientation like this. And we have two 14mm bolts. Get these bolts installed. Okay, so we're moving quite along. The shield is in front, has been installed. Now we're going to install the radiator. Here's the radiator, and there's a radiator shroud. What I need to install are these rubber bushings. So they get installed right there like that. I was expecting to need 2 nuts for this, but the nuts are actually integrated into the lower part of the radiator frame. So, for future reference, the bolts come up from underneath, and there's a nut welded to the frame. Just want to compress the bushing just a bit, okay? You don't want to over tighten this. Just compress the bushing. Once you have that in place, you then install these 2 clips to prevent the bolt from wiggling out. It's just a protection measure to ensure that the bolt never comes undone. Okay, that's complete. Radiator's in place. Let's now install our radiator hoses. If you remember from the first part or the very beginning, the radiator hoses were not in real great shape for this tractor, so I bought both an upper and a lower radiator hose. So here they are. Part number 15261-72940 and 15261-72850. Gonna back off my clamps. So I'm just going to use a little bit of engine oil, and I'm going to put it on this surface of the radiator here, where the hose goes, as well as on the engine. The reason why I'm doing that is just to hopefully improve the installation. So the hose will install this way. I want to make sure that when I have the bracket on, I'll be able to tighten it in place, like it will be accessible. I think if I line it up like that, we can get access to it this side. And then I'll do the same. I'll put him out here. Looks like I gotta back him off a little bit more too. Okay, now on she goes on the engine first. Let's make sure this is not causing us grief. Yes. And we'll loosen him off. There we go. I'll start down here. You want to get a conservative amount of torque on that. That's good right there. We'll now repeat that process for the lower radiator hose.